So I had a bit of a problem when recording footage for Wagyan Land 3. Typically I record these games for about an hour, and that usually gives me enough coverage for everything I want to talk about, but not so much footage that it becomes unmanageable, or that it starts cutting into my scripting and editing time. As my clock was hitting the hour mark, I went, okay, time to wrap things up, but I'm still getting good footage, so I'll stop when I reach a level that doesn't do anything special or different. And then I played for another 15 minutes. Wagyan Land was Namco's premier platformer series, and at the time that Wagyan Land 3 came out, it had already migrated to the Super Famicom. Super Wagyan Land was a year old at this point. The series has a strange history, as it was originally an electromechanical arcade game that encouraged children to yell as loud as they could into a microphone. That became a toy that was wildly popular, a little noisy gun that looked like a dinosaur. And that's what Namco turned into a Famicom game. Besides being the final Wagyan game on the Famicom, Wagyan Land 3 also marks an end for Namco. They're not quite done with the platform yet, but the remaining games are both Famista, the yearly series that really didn't require a whole lot of development work. The plot of Wagyan Land 3 is that the robot rabbits that live on the moon are being oppressed by invaders. Naturally, Wagyan decides to lend a hand. On most of the stages, A jumps, and B will make Wagyan shout. Shouting is how Wagyan defends himself, and enemies who are struck by his shout are stunned for a few moments. Wagyan can then climb on top of them. If you pick up the little guns that are laying around the stage, those are actually the Wagyanizer toys, and they make Wagyan's shout louder. It makes the size of the shot louder, and as it increases in power, it will start going through enemies. It also stuns enemies for longer. When a fourth Wagyanizer is collected, Wagyan becomes invincible. He runs a lot faster and can charge right through enemies to defeat them. But when invincibility wears off, he's back to his base level shout. So there's definitely an advantage in choosing to skip over some of those Wagyanizers until you're ready for a run. One of the big features of the Wagyan Land series are the boss battles. These aren't action-based fights where you're dodging shots and shouting back at the enemy. The boss challenges Wagyan to a kind of minigame. And there are 3 minigames in Wagyan Land 3, 2 of which are returning from previous games. The simplest of these is just a memory game. You want to turn over matching tiles, and if you get it correct, then you get to take another turn. All of the mini-games are tile-based like this, and they all require that you score a certain number of points to pass. One trick to the memory games in this series is that there's always a pattern. It's just a matter of finding it before your opponent gets too many correct. The new style of minigame is a board with some numbers, and your goal is to find on the board the number that's been called out. Early on in this one, the numbers will be in sequential order, which makes it very easy since you'll remember the locations of the next few numbers that you spot as you're hunting for the current one. Later on, though, the numbers are just given in random order. The final minigame is the one that the series is best known for, Shiritori. Shiritori is a Japanese word game where one player gives a word, and then the next player has to provide another word whose first character is the same as the last character in the given word. For example, the first player could say kumo, or spider, and the second player could respond with mogura, or mole. In Wagyan Land 3, there's a set of pictures, and the pictures actually have a few words associated with them. So there's a bit of flexibility there. The boss starts by picking out an image, and then you respond, and it goes back and forth until one of you can't find something in time, or someone picks a word that ends in an isolated end sound with no vowel after it. Japanese words can't begin that way, so that's an automatic loss for the person who used that word. If you really like these minigames, Wagyan Land 3 has a special mode where you could play any of them against your friends. The stages in Wagyan Land tend to be oddly complex. Yeah, mostly you're moving in a straight line and avoiding enemies, but there are hidden paths that will take you to different sets of stages, and sometimes you'll shout and discover a hole that'll take you to a bonus fight. Most of the stages have some kind of special theme or gimmick that makes them stand out too. Obviously, since you're on the moon, there's a low-gravity stage, But there's also a gym where the invaders crank up the gravity to high so that they can work out. There's a roller coaster stage where you can chain your invincibility and charge through crowds of enemies. A jetpack stage where you have to fly around through space, mashing the jump button so that you can maintain altitude. There's a pretty wide variety of platforming challenges here. At the end of every stage, you get a password, so you can always pick up right where you left off. One more thing about Wagyan Land. You earn extra lives through your score, but the requirement for an extra life is really low, and as a result, they just hurl extra lives at you. At the time I had to quit, I had 50 extra lives. If for some reason you needed more, you could always go back to earlier stages. Wagyan Land 3 allows you to move backwards and search stages that you've cleared for additional secrets. Where does Wagyan go from here? Well, Namco tries to keep Wagyan Land as a yearly franchise. The Shouty Dinosaur only gets 2 more Super Famicom entries before the series comes to an end. Namco did attempt a revival of Wagyan Land on the Nintendo DS, though that one didn't stick. Since Japanese fans consider Wagyan Land to be one of the premier platforming series on the Famicom, it's unsurprising that Wagyan Land 3 is really well regarded. A last 8-bit hurrah for its little hero. And I happen to think that it's the best of the series on the Famicom. Wagyan Land 1 is good, Wagyan Land 2 is really good, but Wagyan Land 3 just keeps changing things up, and I think it has a gentler learning curve for those boss minigames. I don't think it's quite one of the very best on the Famicom. I wouldn't put it in my top 20, but it might crack my top 50.